Picture this: bodies left unburied in a Liverpool warehouse, rubbish piling 6 feet high in Leicester Square, roads blocked not just from snow, but because no one would clear them, and through it all, temperatures dropping to minus 24.6 degrees Celsius, the coldest Britain had felt in 16 years. This wasn't just winter, this was the winter of discontent, when the cold outside was matched only by the cold standoff between workers and government. And for those who lived through it, the ice wasn't the worst part. It was watching a country they loved grind to a frozen, bitter halt. It started without much warning. Autumn 1978 was actually mild, one of the warmest on record. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. Workers across Britain had been told to accept a 5% pay rise, while inflation ate away at everything they earned. Thawed workers walked out in September, winning 17%. Others noticed. And by Christmas, the temperature wasn't the only thing dropping. December 30th, 1978. That was the day everything changed. Rain turned to snow. The cold air from Siberia arrived like an uninvited guest and refused to leave. By New Year's Eve, Heathrow recorded a high of -3. Streets disappeared under white, and Britain, already strained by strikes, now faced nature's fury too. The snow fell hardest in the southwest. Devon saw drifts reaching 6 feet. Some areas reported 8-metre snowbanks. Villages like Ilfracombe could only be reached by helicopter. The A20 between Dover and Folkestone became blocked solid. Cars sat bonnet deep on the Isle of Sheppey, 9 in a row, abandoned. And here's the thing. In normal times, Britain would have coped. Gritters would have worked through the night. Roads would have been cleared by morning. But these weren't normal times. The gritters were on strike. The councils blamed staff shortages and union disputes. So the snow stayed and Britain stayed stuck. By mid-January, it wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It was dangerous. January the 13th saw Carnwath in Scotland hit minus 24.6 degrees Celsius, the third lowest temperature ever recorded in the UK. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. The kind where stepping outside feels like punishment. Pipes burst in homes across the country, not just a few, thousands. Water froze solid in the mains. Families woke to find no running water, no heating, and frost patterns on the inside of their windows. Not decorative ones either, thick ice you'd have to scrape just to see daylight. Central heating, for those lucky enough to have it, struggled. Most homes still relied on coal fires, and coal deliveries had stopped. The strikes weren't about greed, they were about survival. A gravedigger in Liverpool described crawling into muddy holes, walls collapsing around him, covered in slime, risking his life every single day, for wages that barely covered rent. When 56 gravediggers in Liverpool and Tameside walked out on January 22nd, it was the first time any of them had ever done it. But they'd simply had enough. The timing was catastrophic. People were dying as people do, and now there was no one to bury them. Funeral homes filled up, then hospital mortuaries, then undertakers ran out of space entirely. Liverpool City Council hired an empty electronics factory in Speke to store the bodies. At one point, 150 corpses were waiting there, sealed in heavy plastic bags with preserving crystals. 25 more arrived every day. Families couldn't say goodbye properly. Services were moved from cemetery chapels to churches elsewhere to avoid confrontations between mourners and strikers. Grieving families had to drive past the very place their loved ones should have been buried, knowing they were somewhere in a warehouse instead. It was heartbreaking, and it was humiliating. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed about bodies piling up, burial at sea being considered. When Liverpool's medical officer of health mentioned that as a hypothetical, if the strike lasted months, the public panicked. Politicians called it an outrage to human decency. One vicar said it undermined the whole structure of society, and maybe he was right, because when you can't even bury your dead, what's left? The gravediggers settled after a fortnight for a 14% pay rise. The bodies were finally laid to rest, but the damage to Britain's image was done. This wasn't just a strike, it was a symbol of a country falling apart. And the strikes kept coming. Binmen walked out on January 22nd. Rubbish piled up on every street. Westminster City Council, run by Conservatives, made a point of dumping it in Leicester Square, right in the heart of London's West End. Mountains of black bags rotting in the cold, rats multiplied, the smell was unbearable, and all the while the snow kept falling. Ambulance drivers refused emergency calls in some areas. The army had to step in. Hospitals reduced services to emergencies only. NHS workers, some of the lowest paid in the country, stood outside with signs and banners. One hospital denied the health minister his morning tea and newspaper when he was admitted for treatment. Small acts of defiance, but they added up. Lorry drivers were striking too. Fuel couldn't get through. Supermarket shelves emptied. Fresh food rotted before it reached the shops, and when it did arrive, there was no one to unload it. Farmers in Hull, unable to get animal feed through, dumped dead piglets and chickens outside the union offices in protest. The union said the farmers had killed them deliberately. The farmers said they died because the strike left them no choice. Blame flew in every direction. James Callaghan, the Prime Minister, made the worst mistake of his career. He'd been in the Caribbean for a summit, warm sunshine while Britain froze. When he returned on January the 10th and faced the press, he told them they were exaggerating. The Sun newspaper ran the headline, "Crisis? What crisis?" even though he never actually said those words. The damage was done. To the public, he looked out of touch, indifferent. And in politics, perception is everything. By mid-January, Britain had given up trying to function normally. Schools closed, businesses shut down. Roads that should have been busy sat empty under snow no one would clear. The few people brave enough to venture out wrapped themselves in every layer they owned and still arrived home shaking. And yet through it all, there were moments of humanity. Neighbours checked on each other. Strangers helped dig out cars. Someone always made tea, even if they had to melt snow to do it. In the pubs that stayed open, people huddled by the fire, sharing stories and laughter that pushed back against the cold outside. It wasn't comfort, but it was community, and in that winter it mattered more than anything. February brought fresh blizzards. The 14th to 16th saw some of the worst weather of the entire winter. Heavy snow, easterly gales, temperatures of -3 with winds hitting 50 miles per hour. Roads cracked open, potholes formed overnight. The south coast was cut off when a storm surge carried cars from a seafront car park into the sea. Giant waves battered the coast, and still the strikes continued. It wasn't until February 14th that the government and union leaders finally reached an agreement. The strikes began to wind down, but by then, nearly 30 million days of work had been lost across the country. The economy was battered, and Britain's patience was gone. When the thaw finally came in mid-February, it felt like the country could breathe again. Water dripped from rooftops, roads reappeared. The first milk delivery arrived unfrozen, and people actually cheered. Life slowly, cautiously returned to something resembling normal, but nothing felt the same. The trust was broken. That May, Britain went to the polls. Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives won in a landslide. Labour, blamed for losing control, was out. Callaghan's government fell, and the laws Thatcher introduced afterwards changed trade unions forever. Strike rules became much stricter. Ballots became required. The balance of power shifted. For better or worse, the Winter of Discontent ended an era. Ask anyone who lived through that winter, and they'll tell you. It wasn't just the cold they remember, it was the feeling that everything was falling apart. The rubbish, the unburied dead, the frozen streets, but also the neighbours who knocked, the strangers who helped, the quiet strength that said, "We'll get through this." Because in the end, Britain did. The snow melted, the strikes ended, and life moved on. Were you there? Do you remember the snow piled high, the strikes, the feeling that winter would never end. We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. What do you remember most from that frozen, difficult time?